Oh, God. You know New York's in the house. Good morning. My name is Gina. I'm an addict. Hi. Thank you. I love you guys, too. I just want to say hi to the sign interpreter, because I always get She's done a great job. And I always say hi to the interpreter, and I always apologize up front because I never know how motherfucker sign interprets. So I'm sorry. But I want to start off first and just say that I'd like to thank the God of my understanding, from whom all miracles and blessings in my life flow today, for allowing me to be here. And I'd like to thank the convention committee for asking me to come today, and especially Jack and Jim and everything that you've done for me. And it's really wonderful to be down here in Virginia. And if I look like I'm standing, I had this problem down in South Carolina, so I'm going to tell you up front so it doesn't bother me anymore. This is a folding stage, and there's a seam down the front, and I'm wearing very thin spike heels that get caught if I move. So if I look like I'm standing like a statue, it's because I'm trying not to make a fool out of myself in front of you by falling on my face when my heel gets caught down here. And I can do that in front of you. I would like not to, but I can do that in front of you because you've shared with me and you've been there through everything, through the good, through the bad, through my pain, through my joy. You shared it all with me. I don't ever like to talk about my story. I find it real boring. I've said my story a lot. A lot of people come up to me and they tell me that they've heard me share somewhere, they've heard my tapes, and I always find that intimidating because I feel like they're going to sit there and say, I know everything she's going to say. You know, Dickie is my convention groupie. This is the 4th convention he's heard me share at. And I'm ready to just ask him to come up here and do this for me because I figure he knows this as well as I do. The thing that I really need to get in touch with is that my story is my story, and that's really all that I have. But I have nothing new to say. And if you come in here hoping to hear something profound or original, you might want to leave now. All right, because everything that I'm going to share with you this morning is something that you've taught me. Everything that I have to share is something that you've given me. I'm not that creative enough to be original. What I have is what you've given me, and all I can do is give it back, but it's something that I heard you say. What I do talk about are feelings. I don't talk about using, a lot of times when I hear war stories, I can't help but compare, and I try real hard not to. But as an addict, I compare. I didn't do that substance. I didn't ingest it in that manner. I didn't hang out in those places. And we talk in here about when we compare, we're looking for a way out. When we identify, we're looking for a way in. And what I identify with are feelings, because we talk in this program that addiction doesn't know any boundaries. It doesn't know about race or sexual identity or creed or religion or lack of religion, and the equalizer that we have in here is the common disease that we share. And what I find equalizes all of us is the fact that no matter where we come from, and no matter what color we are, no matter what sexual preference, we all feel the same way inside. So my story starts out with my very first drug, which was fantasy. And I lived in a fantasy as a young child. I lived in a world that I created, and a world where I pretended to be somebody that I thought you were going to like. because I never felt that I stood for anything on my own, and I didn't feel that I had anything to give. I didn't feel that I had anything that you would like. And I lived in a world where I defined my own reality, and if I said things were, they were, and if I said that they were true, they were, even when they weren't. And, you know, even as I've been here now for over 8.5 years, my story changes the longer I stay clean. The majority of what I remember about my using is not true. Because I made up so many lies and told myself so many things that to this day, I can't really remember what happened and what I told myself happened. But I do remember the way that I feel, you know, and the way that I felt, because when I came in here and I stopped using, the feelings were still there. And now I had nothing to medicate them with, and I had to feel them. The very first feeling I ever remember having was that I did not belong. And I knew that. And I knew that you knew it. And I fought to find a way to live in this world and to fit in with you. And I didn't understand why you seemed to know how to live, and I didn't. And I always felt that there was a book of instructions on life that everybody got as a kid, and they forgot to give me my copy. And I never understood why. But when I picked up my first chemical, I found the way to live in the world. From the very first time I used, I was an addict. I knew that I was always going to do this. And even when it got bad, and it wasn't bad for a long time, just last 8 years, you know, and I only used for 10. And the last 8-9 years of it were really bad. I did things I swore I'd never do. I went to places I swore I'd never go. I hung out with people I swore I'd never be with. And everything that was instilled in me as a child, everything that was morally right, I broke down because I just didn't care about myself. I didn't care about myself, and I didn't have enough self-esteem and self-respect to do it any differently. From the time I was about 12 years old, I used to pray to die on a daily basis. And I don't know that I believed in a God, but I knew that I couldn't stand living with the pain anymore. And I didn't know what other options I had. I remember being so lonely, and I had no friends. I had a lot of people around me all the time, and I had no friends. What I would do is I would call the operator, and I would ask her to talk to me. Or I would dial numbers randomly and try to start conversations with the people on the other end who didn't know me. And I reached that point of desperation that our literature talks about. That point of desperation where being depressed would have been an improvement. You know, the days of not being able to get up out of bed, of living with the shades drawn, of living in fear, of never knowing who was looking for me, never knowing where I could go, not feeling safe anywhere, and knowing that I couldn't stand myself another minute, that I could not go anywhere in this world and live within my own skin. And what had happened for me in there is that the drugs stopped working. I couldn't medicate myself enough anymore to take away the pain of being alive. Nothing I used, no combination, nothing worked. And that scared the hell out of me, because the one thing that I had left was gone, and what I was left with was living with my pain. And I didn't know how to do that. I was blessed to be 12-stepped by a member of this fellowship in October of 1982. And it took me 6 months to hear his message. But he planted the seed. And that's real important for me to remember when I do 12-step work or I do, any type of H&I work. You're there to plant the seed. And hopefully one day, if that sick and suffering addict decides that they've had enough and they've reached a bottom, they'll know where to go. And that's what that addict did for me. And I called him up, and he was living in California, and it was a Sunday night, and I knew that it was over. And I didn't really want to go to Narcotics Anonymous. I didn't really want to stop using. I didn't believe that drugs were my problem. My problem was my old man. My problem was my job. My problem was the people where I worked, the people I hung out with. Everything else was my problem, but not using. But I didn't know where else to go. I had tried everything else. I had done the correctional facilities as a juvenile. I had done the flight decks. And I need to say, I never got locked up on a flight deck for being crazy. I always got locked up for acting crazy. And I knew the difference. I knew in my heart every time that I was committed to a psychiatric unit that I really wasn't crazy. I didn't know how to stop the behavior, though. And I couldn't stop acting crazy. And I called this addict up, and he got in touch with someone in New York, and it was a Sunday night. And in 1983, in Manhattan, there were 2 meetings. There was one on Sunday, and there was one on Wednesday. And he said to me, "You've missed the Sunday night meeting. Can you hold on until Wednesday?" I said, "Sure, I'll try." And I don't know what kept me clean that 3rd day. For some reason, and I believe that it's a power greater than myself that I choose to call God, I did not use for 3 days. And on that Wednesday, I walked into my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and I haven't left since. And I don't believe... And a lot of what you're going to hear this morning is my opinion. And I need to say that. It's my opinion, and if you get offended by it, I'm sorry. This is how I feel. It's not a reflection of Narcotics Anonymous. I don't speak for NA. I'm very grateful that relapse is not a requirement. One of the things that does bother me is back home in my area, you see a lot of people who relapse come back and somebody pats them on the back and says, "That's okay." I'm sorry to say this, but no, it's not okay. Please come back. We love you. Don't walk away. Come on back in. We'll love you until you learn to love yourself. But this is a program of complete abstinence from all drugs, and it is not okay to use. And it's not okay for us to tell people it's okay either. But I walked into that first meeting, and I looked around, and I said, once again, I don't belong here. And NA in New York at that time did not stand for Narcotics Anonymous. It was basically a special interest group. It stood for Needles Anonymous, and I was not an IV user. But I sat in the meeting, and what I heard was everybody in the room talking about all the craziness that went on inside of my head that I never dared tell anybody. And I was terrified to be in there. But at the same time, I had a peaceful feeling because I knew I'd come home. For the first time, I found the place that I belonged. I found people who understood me. I found people who understood how I felt. And we were one. And I wanted to belong here so badly, I didn't want you to tell me to get up and go out that I lied about being an IV user. And I want to tell you that it's a lot easier to lie about that than it is to get honest about it. After you've made up stories about being a hope-to-die dope fiend and running in the street with a needle in your arm. And I never did that, but back then all we thought about was staying clean. We didn't worry about any steps, slogans. We were holding on to staying clean. There were about 50 or 60 of us who held each other together, and it was the same people every night, and we traveled around the city because there'd be 2 meetings in Manhattan and 2 meetings in Queens and 1 meeting in the Bronx, and we'd all hook up on the subway together, and all it was about was not using. And that was all that I heard, was not using. And for a long time, that was all that I did, not use, period. I didn't hear anything else. I heard a lot of suggestions, including get a sponsor. And I'm very intelligent. I don't need to ask you any questions. I can figure things out by myself. I knew what a sponsor was. A sponsor was like when you wanted to get into the union, you needed somebody who was a member to sponsor you. And so when you asked me if I had a sponsor, I didn't want to say no because I walked in here on my own. I wanted to let you know that somebody did sponsor me to come in here, so I said yes. And it took me 5 months of listening before I realized what you meant by a sponsor, so I could go get one. There aren't any dumb questions in Narcotics Anonymous. The only dumb question is the one that you don't ask, and it could kill you. If you don't understand something, please grab somebody and ask them. So I didn't get a sponsor, and you talked about this suggestion about no relationships, which just wasn't applicable to me. And I mean, that was fine for you, but it just wasn't okay for me. And I really did little more than come to the rooms, sit in meetings, and not use. Until I got into a relationship. Which was not a relationship, it was a one-night stand. But I'd like to save face in front of you and tell you it was a relationship. I had 4.5 months, he had 87 days. And I spent the night with him, and by the next morning I had our wedding planned. And you know how we are about that. And I left him and I never heard from him again. And that was the first time in recovery that I had ever felt severe emotional pain. Emotional pain that I decided was enough to take me back out, and I made a conscious decision to relapse. I called another addict and I told them that I was going to relapse because I couldn't stand the pain of the situation. And they suggested that I pray. Now, I was not one much for praying. I have a Jewish mother and a Catholic father, and I grew up confused. I grew up very confused. And through my active addiction in searching for a place to belong, I had tried all of these different meditative disciplines. And I had gone through Zen Buddhism, Satanism, born-again Christianity, Orthodox Judaism. I decided one time I was going to be Orthodox. And really, I wasn't interested in a God. I was interested in something that would give me exactly what I wanted when I wanted it. And none of these disciplines got me that. I was also looking for something to fix me. And none of these gods fixed me. So I had decided at some point that I was an agnostic. I didn't believe that there absolutely wasn't a God, but I pretty much doubted that he was there. And I decided that he had forsaken me. That if he was there, that I was already marked, I was doomed, I was on my way to hell, it was a done deal, and we might as well forget about it. For some reason, I took that suggestion and I prayed. And I asked a God that I didn't know and I didn't understand and I didn't even believe in to please remove the obsession to use. And the miracle happened that the obsession was lifted and I didn't relapse. What that did for me was that started to turn my recovery around, because through that incident, what I learned was that this was the program of Narcotics Anonymous, not GINA B. and that I was going to have to work this program the way this program was designed. And in order to do that, I was going to have to put somebody in my life who knew how to work this program the way that it is. I could not do this by myself. Because when I started looking over those steps, I picked out the ones that I had already done. I picked out the ones that there was no way I was ever going to do. And there were some that just didn't apply to me. You know, the ones about amends and character defects, they didn't apply to me. I didn't owe anybody anything, and I was fine the way I was. I had a drug problem, that was it, but I wasn't using today. Thank God I got a sponsor. I believe very strongly in going through these steps with a sponsor. And I need to say this for me. I came in here with a lot of female issues. I didn't like women. We had nothing in common. You were catty, bitchy, you gossiped, you'd stab me in the back, and you'd take my man in a minute. Now, I was doing all of those things. I didn't see why I was going to think you were any different. And so when I started to look for a sponsor, I decided that I wanted a man. Because I could relate to men. I was one of the guys we could get along. And a man whose recovery in this program I really respect said to me, Gina, if you want to learn about men's problems, you can go speak to a man. But if you want to learn how to be a woman, you're going to have to learn from another woman. The sponsor that I got is the sponsor that I have today. And Fran, I love you even though you didn't call me this morning like you usually do. But she is my sponsor because I truly believe that she is the best damn sponsor in the world. And if you don't think your sponsor is the best damn sponsor in the whole world, I suggest you get a new one. You know, I came into NA not wanting to stop using, but I don't believe that any one of us ended up in here by accident. I just don't believe that the normal people, whatever they are, wake up one morning and say, I think I'll go to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting today. Nobody in here can decide for you if you're an addict, but I would like to invite you to think that if you're in here, if you're in this room, there is no coincidence, and it is probably not an accident that you made a wrong turn down the hallway. I believe that we are chosen, and we talk about that, but I don't believe that it's just us who are chosen, because the God of my understanding is loving and caring. And if I believe that he only chose us, then I would have to believe that the people who are still sick and suffering, he chose to let them stay there and suffer and die. And I can't believe that. That doesn't coincide with the God that I understand today. But I do believe that there is a difference between God's divine will and the free will that God has given me. And I believe that I was always chosen, but I could not be chosen until I chose to be. Through my own free will, I had to walk through these doors. And I believe that I earned my seat and I paid my dues. And I don't have to stand up here today and justify to you why I belong here and why I deserve to be here. That seat is mine, and you're just going to have to get your own. Because I am not giving it up today. I started on the first step, and I love the first step because I believe that we have a first step like no other fellowship in the world. Our first step does not talk about any particular substance, any chemical. It talks about a disease called addiction. And I am addicted to lots of things. I'm addicted to money. I'm addicted to men. I'm addicted to food. I'm addicted to relationships, people pleasing. I'm addicted to anything that will change the way that I feel. And I don't have to go anywhere else, because with the first step that you have given me, you've taken care of it for me. Focus on the disease. And I love what my sponsor told me, because it's still true for me today. The only thing that I have to do in here perfectly is work the first part of that first step. If I don't use, I have a chance. My life does not even have to be manageable. And a lot of times it isn't. But it isn't unbearable today. And that's a big difference for me. I've been going through a situation the past few weeks that I'll probably talk about later. And when we moved on to the second step, we talked about the insanity of repeating the same mistakes and expecting different results. I just learned a real new definition a couple of weeks ago. Real insanity is doing something, knowing full well in advance what the outcome is going to be, and doing it anyway. Insanity is repeating the same mistakes and trying to tell myself why this time it's going to be different. And I'm real good for that. I need to come in here so you can remind me of the things that I've told you, because you throw it back to me. You know, like George last night, my favorite button is take my advice, I'm not using it. And I have 3 women in what I call my family here. And I talk about that. My sponsees are my babies. And I understand that a lot of people don't sponsor that way. But that's the way that it was given to me. And it's the only way that I know how to give it back, and it works. And they, through this crisis, and it has been a crisis for me, have thrown back my own suggestions in my face. I want to tell you, it's hard to take. You know, you look at them and you say, where did you hear that? But they remind me, like my sponsor reminds me, like my support group reminds me, remember the last time? Think about it. This isn't any different. And I need you to do that for me. My disease is a disease of the attitudes. And the drugs did not lead me to the attitudes. It's the attitudes that led me to the drugs. And I need to keep those attitudes in check. One of the things that I have accepted today, and I'm real grateful for, I've accepted that I'm powerless over my thoughts. That this is not a police state up here. This is not communist China. I do not have a lot of control about the shit that flows in and out. What I do have control over is my reaction and what I do with it. And that's what you taught me in the third step. My will. The mental faculty by one chooses a course of decision. That was the dictionary definition that I was taught. That I don't have a lot of control over how I think, but I do have control over what I do with it. And I work real hard on not being judgmental today with people. I really believe that I am always where I am supposed to be. Because if I wasn't supposed to be here, I'd be someplace else. And I believe that you are where you're supposed to be. And the analogy that I use is that when we were all kids, we all had moms who told us, don't touch the stove, it's hot, you're going to get burned. And we all waited for the minute that she turned her back to stick our hand on that stove and go crying. But you know what? We never touched that stove again. I would like a lot of the time to be able to take your experience and to not have to make a lot of the mistakes that I've made. Because most of the mistakes that I've made in recovery, I've heard somebody else talk about it. But I continually have to touch the stove to believe it's hot. Once I touch it, it's a lesson that I learn. And I don't do that again. I believe that everything in here is a choice. I don't believe in good or bad. I don't believe in right and wrong. And when people ask me, about situations, what's your opinion? How do you feel about this? Do you think this is the right thing to do? You are where you are, and I don't live in your skin. What you can live with and what I can live with are probably two different things. But if it's okay for you, I have no opinion, and I have no judgment on it. The third step talks about turning my will and my life over to God. And I needed to get a God before I made that decision, because I wasn't going to turn my will and my life over to anything that I did not believe in. And I don't believe that the second and third step are the same. I don't believe where it talks about a power greater than ourselves and turning our will and our lives over to God. I don't believe that we wasted two steps on the same thing. A power greater than myself today is anybody that can help me. If I'm in trouble legally, I go to lawyers. If I'm in trouble financially, I get accountants. If I need my car fixed, I go to a mechanic. And if I got a problem living, I go to another recovering addict. And you are a power greater than me, because you can do for me what I cannot do for myself. But I learned how to have a relationship with this God. And the relationship was like a relationship with a person. I only gave him a little bit. And I saw what he did with it, and I stepped back. I didn't come in here brimming with love and honesty, as it talks about in our basic text. I didn't trust anybody for anything. And to this day, I come down south, and they laugh at me because I'm from New York, and I won't put my pocketbook on the floor. And that's not a reflection on you. But I eat dinner in a restaurant with my bag in my lap. And I have gotten better at trusting people. But I did not automatically trust this God enough to turn everything over. And I didn't know what turning it over meant. I didn't know how to do that. People said, turn it over. Let it go. What does that mean? Did you ever ask somebody how to do it and honestly get a real answer? Let it go. How do you do that? Well, you let it go. What I did was I made God cans and God bags. And I used to write down what was bugging me, and I used to take a brown paper bag and write God bag on it, and I'd stick it in there, and then I'd staple it, and I'd throw it in the drawer, and I'd say, all right, it's in your bag, now you deal with it. And that was how I turned it over. And I still do that today, and it always amazes me to clean up the house and go through the drawers, and I just fell. And you're on delayed reaction, aren't you? And open up the drawers and go through between the clothes and find these brown paper bags and open them up and read what's inside and laugh, because whatever was the issue is not an issue today. I think I was one of the only people who wanted to do a fourth step. And I wanted to do this fourth step because everybody talked about how bad it was. It was really horrible. And I always loved the dare. I loved the challenge, so I wanted to do a fourth step. And I got the fourth-step inventory guide of 1983. And if anybody is laughing, you know what I'm talking about, Before the Literature Committee revised the four-step inventory, there used to be a whole sexual inventory paragraph that they would ask you to write very specific details on some very specific items. And I looked it over and I thought, no way am I telling anybody any of this. I did the fourth step and I threw it in a drawer, and I didn't tell my sponsor I was finished. I did not want to do the fifth step because I did not trust another human being. Until the pain of sitting with it got great enough that I prayed and took the risk. And the amazing thing that happened is that through that process I learned how to entirely trust another human being. And today I can honestly say that I have no secrets. And not everybody knows everything about me. There are some things that only my sponsor knows. But somebody knows everything. Through my crisis a couple of weeks ago, and what I'm going to tell you about it real briefly, is that the man I was involved with for a year and a half, somebody finally decided to tell me what everybody else knew, which was that he'd been sleeping with somebody else for a year. And he and I work in the same company, and so does she. And when I found out and I confronted the two of them on it, he dumped me. And work, which used to be a very safe haven and refuge for me, became a horror. Because I would go into the office every day and I would see the two of them holding hands, leaving for lunch, leaving at night together, and I felt that I had no place to hide. I did something right after I found out that my head told me I was not going to tell anybody, not even my sponsor. That night I was on my way up to an H&I commitment, and I was going to share at Sing Sing, which is the men's state correctional facility. And I was entering the building with the panel coordinator, and I asked him, by the way, what's the topic tonight? And he said, oh, fourth step. And I said, you're taking me into a room with 60 male inmates on a fourth step meeting? Are you out of your fucking mind? During that meeting, I told 60 male inmates in Sing Sing what I swore I would never tell anybody an hour before, which was that her clothes had been in his office, and I walked by them once too many times, and decided that they would better serve the homeless. Now, I've got to be honest, I really don't need y'all to egg me on with this, okay? Because I've had a lot of people in Narcotics Anonymous, through your love, offer to kick his ass, offer to drive cross-country to kill him for me, and rationalize my behavior. And I appreciate it. I love being sick and having you justify me and validate it. I think it's great. The truth of the matter is, I know in my head that it was wrong. I know in my head that I will one day owe amends. I do not feel in my heart at this point that I owe anything. And I have to be honest about that. That's where I am with it. I just don't feel bad just for today. When I did a fifth step, I found out that I wasn't unique, that I didn't do anything you hadn't done, and I learned acceptance. And I have a bond today with my sponsor through sharing those secrets that I never imagined possible with another human being, especially a woman. She didn't warn me about 6 and 7. I hear a lot of people do 6 and 7 together, and I don't understand that for me because I was told this was a 12-step fellowship, not an 11-step. And I believe that there's a real big difference between 6 and 7. I also believe that as I continue to work the steps and incorporate them into my life on a daily basis, that 6 and 7 are a continuous ongoing process. I don't believe for me that I get new character defects. I believe for me that if you could take every character defect there possibly is and write an exhaustive list, I have every single one of them to some degree or another. The difference on what I work 6 and 7 on a daily basis is what is kicking my ass that 24 hours. And that changes. I also don't believe for me that they are totally removed. Because things that I thought that I worked through and things that I thought were gone, I found out in the last 10 weeks didn't go anywhere. And that the minute I took the focus off of the vigilance of working on a daily basis on them, that they reminded me, hi, thought you were, and keeps me away from the God of my understanding. And if that's what it's doing in my life, then I need to work on it. But I have to be entirely ready before I can ask God to remove it. And being entirely ready for me is being able to admit it and accept it. See, I would like to stand up here and tell you that I'm honest, but the truth is that I'm a liar. And I'm a bullshitter. And as long as I keep lying to you and myself, telling you that I'm honest, I'm never going to work on my lying. In order for me to work on it, I have to admit out loud that I am a liar, or I'm rageful, or I'm jealous. This is not how I want to be. This is not where I want to be, but this is where I am, and I need to accept it in myself. And only when I've accepted it can I ask the God of my understanding to remove it in His time, because the step says that God will remove the shortcoming, not me. All I can do with vigilance is try not to act out. When we become willing in the 8th step, I believe that we need to become willing before we can make amends. And as I was saying with this situation, right now, I am not willing to make those amends. And as long as I am not willing, going over and making a half-hearted attempt to say I'm sorry, amends are not about apologizing. I always apologized for everything my whole life, and I was never sorry. But I was the sorriest mother you ever met. I apologized for breathing. I apologized for living. I apologized for being. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for being apologetic. I was always apologizing for myself because I didn't feel that I belonged to be here. I didn't feel that I was worth living, being here, being in your space, and breathing your oxygen. But the amends that I did make when I became willing were amends of changing my behavior. And when you go to somebody and you tell them what you've done, and you open yourself up and become vulnerable, it's real hard to act that way again. Because there's no more excuses for your behavior. And I find that I can't act the same ways that I did. There's some things that I still can do. And my sponsor tells me that everything in here is a choice. And it's all dependent on how much pain you're willing to take. And there's sometimes that I'm willing to accept that pain. I continue to take personal inventory, and I don't take personal inventory alone. I work my 10th step on a daily basis by going to meetings, by calling my sponsor, and by sharing with you. Because you point out in me what I can't see for myself. I can either look back over the whole day and tell myself that the whole day was shitty and it sucked, or I can look back over at some very sick behavior and I can justify why it was a great day and everything I did was okay. And I need you in my life to be there to continue to hear that personal inventory and to continue to point out things to me, because a lot of times you see things before I do. And I realized that I was not working the 10th step on this situation with my boyfriend, because the 10th step talks about the first thing we do is give ourselves the privilege to stop and think. And had I stopped and thought, I would have seen what was right up in front of my face the whole time. You know, my whole life was always these crises and this chaos that I would always stand in the middle and say, how the hell did I get here? You know, can you identify with that? Like, how did this happen? How did I get here? And when I really stopped and thought, I could look back and see all of the incidents leading up to it, that it didn't just happen. And when I continue to take a personal inventory, I can see those incidents as they're happening. And I have the privilege of stopping right there before they escalate. But I didn't do that here because I was in denial. And I was in denial because I wanted to believe what I wanted to believe. And I wanted to believe that our relationship was okay when it wasn't. When we were wrong, promptly admitted it. It is real hard for me to say I'm wrong. It's easier for me to say I'm sorry. And the 10th step does not talk about when we were wrong, we promptly apologized. It says when we were wrong, we admitted it. And in an attitude of humility to go to someone and say, I was wrong. Not I'm sorry, but I was wrong. I did this and I'm wrong. And I will try to the best of my ability not to do that again. And I believe that we need to clear away the errors, the wreckage of the present that the 10th step does in order to move into the 11th step and make that conscious contact with God and improve on it. And the 11th step talks about improve. It doesn't say we get a conscious contact with God in the 11th step. It talks about we improve on it, meaning we always had one. We've had one all along, and this is the chance to work on improving it. I did not understand spirituality when I came in here, and I didn't understand spiritual principles, and I heard a lot of contradictions. You told me that this is a spiritual and not religious program, but you told me to get on my knees. And you said the Lord's Prayer at the end of the meeting. And I have to tell you for me that I personally believe that the closing of a meeting with the Lord's Prayer is a violation of the 6th tradition. We do not endorse religion in here. But I didn't understand spiritual principles, and I needed to ask you what they were. It was you who taught me that honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, caring, sharing, acceptance, patience, tolerance were spiritual principles. I thought spirituality was about being a nun, or being a monk, or lighting incense. And I was told very simply that the most spiritual thing that I can do is to reach my hand out to another human being and not reach the other one out looking for something in return. And you taught me about selflessness in here because my whole life I never did anything unless there was something in it for me. And I wanted to know up front what it was and when was I going to get it. In Narcotics Anonymous, I learned how to love people and use things. And that is a change, because when I was using, I loved things and I used people. I had a saying when I was out there so I could identify with the slogans, because when I was active, I always had a slogan. And my personal slogan was that there were 4 animals to happiness: a mink on your back, a jaguar in your driveway, a tiger in your bed, and a jackass to pay for it all. So I could ID with slogans when I got here. I had a few of my own. Don't get mad, get even. I live my life by that. The 11th step meditation teaches me to be quiet and to center myself, to be receptive when the God of my understanding speaks through you. I don't believe for me, and this is personal, I hear a lot of people share that they believe that God answers them in meditation. I believe for me that the God of my understanding speaks through you, and that meditation centers me and grounds me to be receptive, to hear the God of my understanding when he speaks through you. And I have to be centered to hear the message. I always wanted to know what God was about. I looked for him in a lot of different places. And the one place that I didn't look for him is exactly where he is, and that's in all of our hearts. And if you want to know what God looks like, turn around and take a look at the person next to you. God is in here, in all of us, the one place that we never thought to look, right inside all of the time. And when I get that gut feeling, I believe that that's my God feeling. You know when you get that gut feeling that something's okay, or that something isn't okay, and you can't explain it, but you know it is? I believe that that's my God. The 12th step talks about spiritual awakenings. And I believe that I continue to have a spiritual awakening. One of the things that I do have repeatedly are spiritual experiences. And my sponsor talks about spiritual experiences as being when you are somewhere at the exact moment that you're supposed to be there, and you know the reason why. And that feeling that comes over you because you know that you're right where you're supposed to be. I had the opportunity to share until the wee hours of this morning with another recovering addict about a lot of feelings and a lot of pain and a situation that we were both sharing together that we hadn't spoken about with a lot of people, and there were a lot of parallels to our stories. And I got the goosebumps and the chills last night because that feeling came over me. I knew why I was supposed to be in Virginia Beach. And it wasn't to come up here and speak at the spiritual breakfast. It was so that addict and I could find each other and share and be okay. Because what we've been going through, we don't hear talked about a lot. You know, a lot of times we get a little bit of time, and I hear people in my area talk about this brilliant notion that when you have time, you shouldn't be in pain anymore. And it's not okay to share it. That you have an obligation to let the newcomer know that recovery is wonderful. And recovery is wonderful. And I love the convention slogan, the promise is freedom and the message is hope. But life on life terms sucks sometimes. And if I hear an addict walk into the room and everything is always okay and God is always wonderful and the sun is always shining, what am I going to do when I'm in pain? What kind of experience, strength, and hope am I getting to go through it when I hit that point? I need to hear from you how you got through it. What did you do? What were the steps that you used? What was the path that you took? But if you're not honest about where you are, I'll never know that you were there. And if I'm not honest about where I am, you'll never know that I was there. And we can't help each other when we walk into meetings and just put a smile on our face and say everything's okay. That's not the experience, strength, and hope that we share in here. For me, I believe that. It says in the basic text in What is the Narcotics Anonymous program that our meetings should have an atmosphere of empathy. and that we should strive to be understanding and non-judgmental with each other. And sometimes I feel like I've walked into Invalidators Anonymous. And I'm not dumping a mess. I'm really not trying to dump a mess. Where I am today is trying to love people unconditionally and not just talk about it. And I'm really working on that. And I'm working on holding on to those people who are able to do it for me. Because I had a real kick in the ass over the past couple of months. Because this addict, who is a big caretaker, who is usually always okay, everything's fine, come to me, I'll solve all your problems, I'll give the whole world a kiss and a hug, couldn't wipe her own ass. And hated like hell to admit it. Because I have never felt like that in recovery. It was the first time since I've been clean that I had to say to people, I have nothing to give you. And you all rallied around me. You spoon-fed me, literally, when I couldn't eat. Picked me up, dragged me out to meetings, held me when I cried. And it was real hard for me to get out of the role because I really wanted to be just okay, and I wasn't. But you have been there for me, and I hope by my sharing what I've been sharing about, that somebody can be validated if they're going through the same thing or they felt the same thing, that it's okay. I got the validation yesterday when I heard Janice share that I was right where I was supposed to be. And I needed that. Because I walked into meetings in too much pain and said, this man is killing me. I haven't eaten in 6 weeks. I've lost 18 pounds and I don't sleep at night. And a well-meaning addict looked me in the face and said, let it go. And that is not an atmosphere of empathy. And that is not an atmosphere of non-judgment. I knew that I needed to let it go, and I didn't have a clue how. And I was willing to take a suggestion, but there weren't any suggestions coming. And really, I was not able to let it go, and I'm still on the tail end of this. It's gotten better because I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and that's all that I could do. The first part of step 1, I just hadn't used. There were days that I couldn't pray, and there were days when I would sit and point my finger up at the ceiling and tell God how pissed I was. And one of my grand sponsees who's here today said to me, God doesn't come from a dysfunctional family. He can handle it. Now, why am I going to lie about being mad at God? If I don't tell him, is he not going to know? And I believe today that we have a close enough relationship that he knows when I'm angry with him, and I believe that he loves me for who I am, not in spite of who I am, because he created me the way that I am. And it is okay for me to be angry with him, and it's okay for me to tell him that. I don't like what you've done. I'm working on surrendering because I learned in the 11th step, God's will be done. And what the 11th step is about is you have two choices. You could take it quietly or you could take it kicking and screaming. But God's will be done in the end. And I honestly chose to take this one kicking and screaming the whole way. And a friend of mine, an addict down in Florida, called me and said, God, Gina, God is just prying your fingers off of this. You're holding on so tight, you just won't let go. He's just prying your fingers off. And I still had my fingernail dug in. The surrender and the letting go has become a process. And I believe that when we are at point A, this can't be point B. You can't have 2 points at the same place. This is point A and this is point B. This is the process in between to get there. And that's just where I am, in the middle of the process. But I have the faith today because the message is hope. That if I don't use no matter what, and I keep doing what I'm doing, that it will get better. And I see that it has gotten better. It just hasn't gotten better when I wanted it to. But that spiritual awakening comes not from osmosis, not from doing all the service positions, not from sponsoring 20 people. It comes as a result of the previous 11 steps. And I have to do the previous 11 steps to have had the spiritual awakening as a result. Try to carry the message to addicts, and it's our message, it's not my message. I work the 11th step before I work the 12th, and I ask God to use me as an instrument of His will to let His words, and not mine, flow out. And if you like anything I said today, please don't say thank you. Thank Him. Give it to Him because it's all His. It's not mine. And I also need to remember that the results are up to Him. I can only make the effort in carrying the message. What happens is up to God. And I need to walk away and leave that alone. I don't 12-step people by myself. I don't make 12-step calls by myself. It's not about jeopardizing my own recovery. And the hardest thing that I have had to learn in recovery, that I do not do that much better than the first time I tried, is to try to practice these principles in all my affairs. And I work on a daily basis because I believe that this program is the steps and the traditions, and they are portable. They go with me in my back pocket wherever I go. I only spend an hour and a half a day in here with you. I spend 22 and a half out there with the other people. But I could sit in here for an hour and a half and be somebody that the other 22 and a half I find real hard to be. And I work at that. And I don't work at it just because this is what the program teaches me to do and it's the right thing to do. I do it because the message of hope for me is the ability to live with myself today. Something that I never dreamt possible. And I can stand up here today and I can look out on this room, and it's no offense to anybody in here, but I don't want to be anybody else. And I never thought that that would be possible. That's a miracle because I always wanted to be you. I always saw something about you that I liked better. I liked the way you dressed. I liked your hair. I liked the way you talked. There was something I liked better about you than me. What I strive for today in my recovery is not to use so that I can live life on life's terms and live comfortably within my own skin. And when I work this program in all of my affairs, practice these principles, I'm able to do that more. This has been a real interesting year for me. And like a good addict, the last 10 weeks sucked, so the whole year sucked. Forget about the other 42. But that's not true. You loved me through a lot of things this year. And I need to say this because I'm real proud of myself. I finally got my driver's license. And that was a real big fear for me. And you understood that. And you never pushed me. And everybody here in New York has taken me to a meeting or home from a meeting at one point or another. And today I'm giving people rides back. And I worked through the fear, and I didn't work through it alone. I did it with your help. I like to say that I'm a proud member of the Fleetwood Sanctuary group in Mount Vernon, New York. And that is my home group because it's the best damn home group in Narcotics Anonymous. And if you're ever up in Mount Vernon, New York on a Thursday night and you need a step meeting at 8 o'clock, please come by and visit us. I believe what this program taught me, everything that I needed to know how to stay clean, I heard at my first meeting. You told me don't use no matter what, join a group, get a sponsor, work the steps, come early, leave late, get involved. Real simple. And that still works today. I still go to meetings, I still call my sponsor, and I give back to Narcotics Anonymous. And I do what I can in here in service, and no matter what I do, I never personally feel like it's enough. And when I hear the second tradition read, it always seems like it's the people who don't do any service who yell, "Thank God." Thank God for those trusted servants. Thank God for everybody in here who has kept the doors open when this sick and suffering addict needed to come to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. Thank God I never found the door closed because somebody said, let somebody else do it. And I need to say that I'm not also a recovering addict, I'm also a recovering NA Nazi. And I used to try to guilt people into service. And I try not to do that today. I can only tell you what it's done for me. I chair our ASC, and through the last 3 months of the year that I was not leaving the house, and I did not want to go anywhere, and I did not want to get up, and I wanted to isolate, thank God I had that meeting to go to. Because holding that service position and knowing that I had a commitment to Narcotics Anonymous got me out of myself for a few hours just for that day. And service has allowed me to travel all over the world and walk into conventions all over the world and know a whole bunch of people everywhere, and that's really neat. And no matter where I go, the traditions of this program ensure me that if it's a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, no matter how you do it, no matter what your format is, I hear the same message, the message of hope and recovery from the disease of addiction. And I'm very grateful for that, to know that I can go wherever I am, that NA will be there. What's been reinforced for me through this situation is that I need you. The we of this program is really what it's about. Without you, I can't do it. I can't do anything. And after over 8.5 years clean, I need to be real honest. I can't take care of myself. I can take care of you, but I can't take care of myself. And thank you for doing that for me. You told me that you would love me until I was able to love myself, and you're still doing that today. And please keep on loving me. Everything that we do in here, all of the service, all of the work, it's for one purpose only. And that's so that when that addict who's never heard of us, who has no idea what we're about, hits that door, there's somebody there to give him a hug and say, welcome to Narcotics Anonymous, you never have to use again. And that's all that it's about. I've been told that the mind does not take in more than the butt can endure. And I thank you for your patience this morning, for asking me to come and share with you. And I'd like to leave you with one last thought, and that is, if anybody asks you how NA works, let them know it works just fine. Thanks.